So what is a classic aeroplane? Some people, like Mike Falls from Melbourne, would say a North American Harvard. The Harvard is an advanced trainer for advanced pilots. After 200 hours on the Mustang, says Falls, you're ready for the Harvard of the Vietnam War. The Trojan was never intended to be anything other than a trainer, but in Laos they were used as ground attack aircraft. Statement for all women aviators.
After the race, when we pulled up, I just suddenly noticed that I was drenched. I was dripping wet in the...
Australia was the only country to build the Mustang under license.
But there are no accidents and the squadron's down. Home in time for dinner, in fact. None of them were detained at the office.
But if you believe that small is beautiful, there's always the boomerang. The 163 was revolutionary for its day, but the truth was it killed more of the pilots who flew it than it ever did of the enemy. The reason for that was the extremely volatile nature of the fuel which powered it. On the ground, the Comet was towed to its takeoff point and retrieved by a three-wheel tractor known as the Scheuchschlepper. To get the tail up, he had to squeeze down on the brakes. Soviet MiG-15. The Meteor was Britain's first jet-propelled fighter, but although it first flew in Britain in 1943, it didn't enter MiG-15s. The MiGs were mostly flown by Chinese pilots with some Russian advisors. The MiGs could fly higher and were more MiGs in their Polish license-built form are no strangers to the Australian Civil Register. Sabres could carry a maximum of 2,000 pounds of bombs, in addition to the two 30mm cannons. In fact, the Sabre never once got to fellows of the Polish aerobatic team. It cruises comfortably at more than 300 fire-breathing Dragon. 18 cylinders, 2,550 horsepower, and the exhausts belching blue smoke make this unquestionably one of the fastest propeller-driven aircraft ever built. 52 years ago, this Boston light bomber crashed in New Guinea. Now, after a painstaking restoration lasting 12 years, it looks like the machine it once was. Why is this aircraft so important to the history of the RAAF?
The Boston itself.
Big Nig was found in a swamp in Bumbura as recently as 1994. It was the most intact of all the wrecked Bostons. It even had the navigator's thermos flask full of coffee. It was lifted from its watery grave by a giant Russian. The Australian-built Lincoln is dead and buried. The Mark 8 Spitfire, owned by Mr. Colin Pay of Scone, is still the only example currently flying in Australia and probably the best-known warbird. 104 had been delivered by the end of the war. Mosquitoes were built out of spruce, plywood and balsa wood and glued together. Two Rolls-Royce Merlin Mark 76-77 with two-stage, two-speed superchargers. Although the aircraft was later used as a children's cubby house, the instruments and internal fittings were largely intact and have Australia's only surviving walrus. In 1947, it was shipped to Heard Island with the RAAF's Antarctic.
Type of dive bombers to her aerial armada, and they have an apt name, the Vol-T Vengeance.
Another of Camden's treasures is the Bristol Beaufighter. This Australian-built machine served with 22 Squadron at Morotai. It's largely original, apart from the engines, which are a different mark of Bristol Hercules, taken from a Bristol freighter.
We'll take off.
Incredible hitting power. If it fired its guns, its cannon, and its rockets at once, the salvo was equivalent to that of a naval cruiser. This aeroplane hadn't flown for 24 years before restoration started. It was escape. To make room for the smoky start signifies that this is the biggest classic aeroplane on the Australian Civil Register, the mighty Lockheed Super Constellation, owned